So you guys just heard me talk to the prolific Oliver Stone about his film trajectory, including some of the most important cinematic masterpieces of our time. And now, he and historian Peter Kuznick are seeking to push the envelope once again, this time through a 10-part Showtime series called The Untold History of the United States. Check it out.
History is exciting, and I want to make it as exciting as it can be. We take a history subject and we make it not only dramatic, but we are compassionate. I always felt there's a disconnect about what's officially reported and what actually happened. We can't accept the stuff that's handed down.
So to talk about the series and why it's so important to revisit American history through an alternate lens, I'm joined now by award-winning film director Oliver Stone, along with historian and professor at American University, Peter Kuznick, who are both the creators of the series and the authors of its accompanying book, The Untold History of the United States. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on. So I saw most of the series already. It was mind-blowing. I encourage everyone to check it out. And I wanted to bring up a main pillar of the series, especially being relevant with the anniversary of Pearl Harbor last week, the dropping of 2 nuclear bombs on Japan. You know, and growing up in my education, that's the end of the chapter.
Yeah,
we dropped the bombs, the war was over, we won.
That's what I believed, and that's the way I grew up. That's the founding myth. My children, I had 3 of them, went to school, went to high school, and got the same story. We had to bomb Japan to finish the war. They were fanatics, and we had to save American lives.
Yeah, the idea was if we didn't drop the atomic bomb, the United States would have had to invade. We would have lost. Truman says in his memoir, he was told 500,000 men would have died in the invasion, and he had no choice but to drop the atomic bomb. That's not the end of the story for us. That's the beginning of the story, and it's the beginning also of the mythology.
Well, the Soviets are invading Japan. That's the other side of the coin. And the Soviet invasion is what really terrifies the Japanese. And the bomb is being dropped to basically send a message to the Russians that, hey, new ball game, end of World War II. We're no longer allies. I'm making a long, thick story short. But Truman has a different strategy than Roosevelt ever dreamed of. And that's a strange disconnect. We get into that, too, because of the Wallace. Henry Wallace was the vice president who got bumped off the ticket in '44, allowing for Truman to get in there. It's a great story, and that's why you say, why history? Because the past is prologue.
We don't hear much about Wallace, do we, growing up?
Henry Wallace, yeah.
Henry Wallace.
Let me back up and just explain. I think we might have gone too quickly. The Americans knew, Truman knew, he said that the main reason he was going to Potsdam was to make sure that Stalin and the Russians came into the war. Because the United States intelligence kept saying that the thing that the Japanese dreaded the most, the thing that would finally break the Japanese back, was the Soviet entry into the war. And the Soviets entered the war on August 9th, 3 days after the bombing of Hiroshima, and then the United States drops the second bomb before the Soviets have a chance, before the Japanese have a chance to respond to the Soviet invasion. And that's what made the difference. The United States had already shown that it could wipe out Japanese cities. We wiped out 100 Japanese cities with fire bombs. But what changed the equation was the Soviet entry, which meant now the Japanese military strategy was going to be bankrupt, and their diplomatic strategy, trying to get the Soviets to get them better surrender terms, was bankrupt. That's what led to the end of the war. But we knew that in advance that was going to have the effect. And dropping the atomic bomb, 6 out of 7 of America's 5-star officers, generals and admirals, who got their 5th star during World War II, said that the atomic bomb was either morally reprehensible or militarily unnecessary. And Douglas MacArthur, General MacArthur, says that if we had told the Japanese they could keep the emperor, they would have surrendered in May. We don't think that. We think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but the atomic bomb was not necessary, and the fact that it's so central to the Cold War, because it's sending a message to the Soviet Union, and it's exactly how Stalin interpreted it, and Stalin's generals interpreted it, that they were really the target, because the Soviets knew better than anybody that the Japanese were trying to surrender, because they were trying to surrender, get the Soviets to get them better surrender terms. So for their mind, it was not only gratuitous, but it was so gratuitous that they said the United States was ruthless enough to do anything to get its way, and that this was a warning to the Soviet Union at that point.
I think another aspect of World War II history is the deaths. Another aspect of learning about World War II in history books is the proportionality. You know, the U.S. sacrificed so much. I wanted to play a really important part of the series right now.
By the time it was over, 60 to 65 million people lay dead, including an estimated 27 million Soviets, between 10 and 20 million Chinese, 6 million Jews, over 6 million Germans, 3 million non-Jewish Poles, 2.5 million Japanese and 1.5 million Yugoslavs. Austria, Britain, France, Italy, Hungary, Romania, and the United States each counted between 250,000 and 500,000 dead.
The disproportionality of this is stunning. I really didn't even know the magnitude of those deaths before I saw that, so that was really incredible. I mean, it completely shatters the misconceptions that we have growing up about.
Well, so
about
we all did. I mean,
yeah.
we had America. We still think America won the war D-Day and on June 6, 1944, but the war was well on its way to being won. The Soviets had broken the back of the German military in Russia, at Stalingrad and at Kursk. And then they were moving. At that time, we landed at D-Day. They were moving through Eastern Europe. The momentum had shifted. The Germans lost far more men on the Eastern Front, 6-1 or something like that, than they ever lost on the Western Front. Besides that, it sets up the whole concept of what World War II was, because we don't ever take into account the role of the British Empire, which controlled the largest part of the world, the richest resources, prior to World War II. So, as student, I mean, I see you're an American student like me. I mean, we're lost in this mythology from the beginning of our lives on. It's like the bomb was necessary. We won World War II. We were the good guy. We have this right to police the world because we won that war. Well, none of these are above or true. Well, the only reason we have the right is because we have the might, because we have the atomic bomb. And we led all the way through the entire arms race with the Soviets. We led by sometimes by large margins, sometimes by less margins. But we maintained this grip, this dominion over the world. And now we've moved into another era with space, with cyber warfare. We control, it's called what they call full spectrum dominance, if you like that terminology. But essentially, we are a war machine, and we have a huge investment in an industry that we can't control.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
No, I agree. Oliver laid it out perfectly. The United States military has dominated the world. We've got 800 to 1,000 bases now. We've got all these carrier groups. We're weaponizing space. Russia and China have been the lead for trying to prevent the weaponization of space, and the United States is ignoring them. Sometimes the vote in the United Nations is everybody in the world against the United States. We insist on weaponizing space. Now we're using...
And Israel, I think.
Sometimes Israel hasn't even voted, actually, and sometimes the Marshall Islands, too. But the United States basically stands alone on these things. And we're spreading this. We spend so much on our military, so much on our bases, 40% of the budget.
But what upsets us perhaps the most is we think that we have the psychological right as Americans to do that. You see, I think the whole debate is wrong between Romney and Obama, between all this bipartisan foreign policy about how strong we should be and can we get stronger and stronger. Why is not anybody outside this mindset asking what is the path away from global control? Why can we not join the world and be a peaceful, cooperative member of a global perspective with a global history, that we belong together as one planet, especially with the climate threat that is upon us. So this is what's lacking in our schools, in our thinking. We have what they call American exceptionalism at the root of our heart. We look at the flag and we think that's the greatest flag that ever existed, that people are dying to come here, and that we are the greatest. This is a very, I think, unhealthy mindset.
It's the conventional wisdom indoctrinated
because
to
you have the atom
American
bomb,
society.
sweetheart. That's why.
Yeah,
you know, because you think so. And nothing lasts in history. That we know. 6 empires fell in the 20th century. There's no empire can last except through. We may maintain a military dominion, which is probable because of our space edge over the next 20, 30 years. But think about the spiritual tyranny that's within. What happens to the citizenry when you dominate a world?
And one of the things that Henry Wallace warned about in 1945 and 1946, if we treat the Russians, we treat the Soviets so brutally now when we've got the bomb and we've got all the power, how are they going to respond when they get an upper hand? We have to think about that same thing with the Chinese. The National Intelligence Council report that just came out this week says that by 2030, China is going to have the biggest economy in the world. Not the United States, but China. That China is going to be moving toward military parity at some point. This is our chance to get it right with China. Instead of this Pacific pivot that we have now, Hillary Clinton wrote that article in Foreign Policy magazine titled America's Pacific century, that the United States is going to pivot toward Asia now in order to control China. If that's the mentality, then when the Chinese become more powerful than the United States, how are they going to treat us? I mean, this is our chance to actually have a pivot, a very good kind of pivot, by creating a broader world community that includes the Chinese, rather than saying that they're somehow the enemy who we've got to contain.
Or there's a broader breakdown. It's not just China versus the U.S. I mean, that's kind of an American fantasy about us, them, like a game. But, you know, you think about regional powers that all come on and start to revolt against essentially a tyranny of will by the U.S. Let's say Brazil and India and Turkey, Venezuela. All these these countries are rich in resources, and they are regional powers, and it makes sense for them to resist. And I think the U.S. feels that the more we can impose our will through our ways of doing business, people will see that it's the right way. It doesn't work that way. People don't have the same values that we have, as we know from the George Bush, you're either with us or against us.
Right. We grow up learning how to manage the empire without questioning whether or not we actually need one.
That's right. And Obama, by the way, is very good at it. I think he's a much better manager than Bush, and when he looks in the eye in that camera and he says, "I will keep this country strong. We're going to be the indispensable nation," he repeats it. You better
He's a
believe
very good
that he
salesman. And unfortunately, we're out of time. It was an absolute honor, pleasure to have both of you on. I really encourage everyone to check out the Untold History of the United States. It's absolutely groundbreaking work, really important for everyone to see it in this country.
Thank you, Darcy.
I really appreciate it.